Is there something you have been meaning to do? Something you have been carrying in your chest? For months, maybe years. That you keep telling yourself. You will begin when the time is right. When things settle. When you are more ready. When life gives you a little more room. If that sounds familiar, stay with me until the end of this story. Because I want to tell you about a man named Thomas. A carpenter who lived in a small village. At the edge of a wide river. A man who understood wood. Better than most people understand themselves. And a man who nearly lost everything. Not because of what he did. But because of what he kept waiting to begin. And the moment he realized it was already almost too late. The village was not a rich place. But it was full in the way that small places can be full. Full of familiar faces. Full of the smell of cook fires in the evening. Full of children running between the houses. And old men sitting outside. Watching the world the way only old men can. Thomas had lived there his whole life. He was known as a good carpenter. His hands knew what they were doing. The way hands do. When a skill has been passed down. Through a father, and a grandfather before that. He built tables that lasted. Chairs that held weight without complaining. Doors that fit their frames. Even after years of rain and heat and use. He was respected. He was trusted. He was 41 years old. And he had a dream he had been carrying. For as long as he could remember. A dream that had never left his chest. And never become anything else. Since he was a young man. Thomas had wanted to build a boat. Not a small fishing canoe. A real boat. The kind that could carry a family. Across the wide river. To the market town on the other side. A journey that currently took most villagers. Half a day on foot around the long way. He had the knowledge to build it. His grandfather had built boats. He had watched those hands. And stored everything they knew. He had the wood, or could get it. He had the tools. He had the space behind his workshop. Where the boat could take shape. Across the dry season. What Thomas did not have. Was the moment he was waiting for. Each year when the dry season came. The only season suitable for building. Something arrived with it. One year it was a large order of furniture. From the chief's household. That he could not turn away. The next year his wife fell ill. And needed his attention more than the wood did. The year after that. The rains came earlier than expected. And the dry season was short. And every year. Thomas told himself, next season. When things are calmer. When the timing is better. When the conditions are right. He had been telling himself this. For 11 years. The space behind his workshop. Was still empty. He had never said it out loud. But in his mind, that boat was not just wood. It was the life he believed. He was meant to build. There was an old man in the village. Whose name was Elias. He was known for sitting outside his door. In the late afternoon. Watching the river in the distance. With the patience of someone. Who had made peace. With everything the river had ever taken from him. One evening Thomas passed him on the path. Elias called out to him. Thomas. Come and sit a moment. Thomas sat. They watched the river together in silence. For a while. The way men in villages sit. When there is no hurry. And the light is going slowly. Then Elias said. When are you building the boat? Thomas was surprised. You know about the boat? The old man smiled slowly. Everyone knows about the boat, Thomas. You have been talking about that boat. Since you were a young man. Thomas looked at his hands. I am waiting for the right season, he said. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said. Time does not wait for you to feel ready, Thomas. It just keeps going. Thomas said nothing. They sat there until the light left the river. He did not sleep well that night. And what he understood, in the long dark hours before morning, sitting alone with the sound of the river, somewhere in the distance, is the part of this story that I think you need to hear most. The right season was a story Thomas had been telling himself to protect himself from one thing. Not from failure. Not from difficulty. Not from the hard work of building. From the possibility that he would begin, and the boat would not be as good as the one he had been imagining. The boat in his mind was perfect. Built in perfect conditions. In a perfect season. With perfect time and perfect readiness. The real boat. The one that would exist in actual wood. And actual weather. And actual imperfect circumstances. Could never match that. And so Thomas had chosen the perfect imaginary boat over the real imperfect one. For 11 years. Because the imaginary one could never disappoint him. Elias had done the same. 4:23. Until his hands made the choice for him. Thomas got up before dawn. He walked to the space behind his workshop. He stood in it for a long time. He looked at where the boat had been living only in his mind. For 11 years. Then he thought about his son, 12 years old, who had started asking questions about the river. Questions about the market town on the other side. Questions about the journey. Questions that sounded, to a father's ear, like the beginning of a young man's ambition. Thomas had no answer. Except the long way around. The half-day walk. The same path his own father had walked. He wanted something different for his son. He wanted his son to look at a problem and see a way across it. And he understood, quietly, clearly. The only way to teach that was to stop walking around and start building. Thomas began the next morning. The wood was not perfect. The season was already half over. He had orders waiting. And not as much time as he would have liked. He began anyway. The sound of wood being cut filled the space that had been silent for 11 years. His son came after school each day and watched. Sometimes he handed Thomas tools without being asked. The way children absorb the work of their parents before they understand what they are absorbing. The boat took most of the dry season. It was not the boat Thomas had imagined. For 11 years. It was better. Not because the wood was finer. Or the craftsmanship beyond anything he had done before. But because it was real. Because it existed. Because every imperfect joint and careful curve had been made by hands that had finally decided that beginning was worth more than waiting. The morning Thomas and his son carried the boat to the river. Elias was sitting outside his door, watching. He said nothing. He just nodded once. The nod of a man who had waited too long himself and was glad someone else had learned the lesson while there was still time to use it. The boat still crosses the river. Thomas's son takes it now. He has grown into the kind of young man who looks at a problem and asks how to cross it, not how to walk around it. Thomas believes that did not happen by accident. He believes a child learns not from what their parents say, but from what they finally do. And Thomas thinks sometimes about those 11 years. About all the dry seasons that came and went, while the space behind his workshop stayed empty. He does not think about them with bitterness. He thinks about them the way you think about rain that fell while you were standing under a roof. You were protected, but you were also not moving forward. There is a version of waiting. That is wisdom. The patience to let something ripen. To prepare properly. To choose the right moment. With care and intention. And there is a version of waiting. That is fear. Wearing the clothes of wisdom. Thomas lived in the second version. For 11 years. The difference between the two. And this is what nobody tells you. Is not in the waiting itself. It is in the honesty. Of why you are waiting. If you are waiting because you are preparing. Keep waiting. If you are waiting because the thing in your mind is safer than the thing in your hands. Then let me ask you what I asked at the beginning of this story. What are you waiting for? The season you are waiting for may already be here. It just doesn't look the way you expected. The wood is available. The space behind your workshop is empty. And the river is wide. But it has always been crossable. That was a story from Tales for Thought. If Thomas's story stayed with you. If there is something waiting to be built. In the space behind your own workshop, subscribe. Every week I sit down and tell one story. A simple, honest human story. About a real decision. And what it quietly cost, or quietly built. The next story is already waiting.